Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul is with us. And Senator, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. Your reaction to North Carolina last night. Go ahead and parse the numbers. Is it good news, or are you in trouble for next year?
Well, I think very good news, and it still shows the political clout that the president has. North Carolina has been drifting to become more of a purple state. It's a battleground state. It's always difficult for the U.S. Senate races. It'll be close there this year. But I think it shows the president still has clout, and the president resonates, the vice president being there. So this was a national election, not just a local election. So I think it is good news for us. But it also shows that the message of socialism, the message that these people are so ignorant of history, they don't realize that most socialism in the past 100 years has ended in authoritarianism. Look, I've got a book coming out this fall, The Case Against Socialism, because we're going to talk about how socialism ultimately means state violence, and it means something that leads to authoritarianism that people need to remember. Are the young people in our country who think socialism is a good idea? I think when they discover what socialism ends up in, I think they're going to be sort of saying, oh my gosh, maybe we really don't want to try socialism in America.
Well, we'll bring you back when the book's out, okay? but in the meantime, let's push forward with the news from yesterday, Sandra.
John Bolton is out. What are the implications of that, Senator?
I think this makes it a lot less likely that we'll have war around the world. I think the president's instincts are great on trying to extricate us from perpetual war. You know, he said in the State of the Union that great nations don't fight perpetual war. He's talked about, both in the campaign and as president, about trying to end America's longest war, that we no longer really have a concise mission in Afghanistan. I take the president at his word, and I really want to help the president. But I think people like John Bolton really had their own agenda. He's been for regime change around the world. He wants regime change in North Korea and Iran and every country. He wanted it in Iraq. He wanted it in Libya. And see, what you get is, you don't get Thomas Jefferson when you get rid of these strong men. What you end up getting is chaos and a breeding ground for terrorism. So I've had long objections with Bolton. I think he gave the president bad advice. I also think he had his own agenda that was contradicting the president and made it hard for the president to try to achieve peace in some of these areas.
There are those who disagree with you, and you clearly are aware of that. Wall Street Journal, here it is. America's adversary has lost a rare internal restraint on President Trump's inconstant and transactional security instincts. The world is now a more dangerous place. It goes on to say that they're applauding this move in places like North Korea, in Iran, in Venezuela.
I couldn't disagree more. I think the people who believe this naive notion, this Woodrow Wilsonian notion that we can make America safe for democracy by toppling regimes, we end up making it worse. So all of these people wanted to topple Saddam Hussein, but guess what? When we toppled Saddam Hussein, we got chaos, we got the rise of ISIS, and Iran got stronger. So Iran is more of a threat to the stability of the Middle East now than when Saddam Hussein was there as a counterbalance. So these people are naive. They think that we can recreate the world in our image and that everything will be fine and Thomas Jefferson will get elected in Iran. No, what happens is it leads to chaos, more terrorism, and more of a breeding ground for terrorists. So I think there really is a valid philosophical debate here, but I think actually the president's instincts are very good because he comes from outside the swamp. The swamp in D.C. for foreign policy is Republicans and Democrats who believe we have to always occupy territory, we have to always occupy every country, and that somehow we can do nation building, but it's bankrupting us. And you'll hear the president say over and over again that we're wasting $50 billion a year in Afghanistan that could be better spent at home, and I couldn't agree more.
So, Senator Paul, your colleague Lindsey Graham in the Senate had a message for the president on that. Here's Lindsey Graham.
I'm a pretty hawkish guy. But after 18 years, it's okay to reevaluate our commitment in Afghanistan. It makes perfect sense to me. But I'm just urging the president, don't ignore sound military advice. You can reduce our presence in Afghanistan, but if you leave Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are coming after us.
So how should we proceed, Senator?
I think it's an antiquated sort of last century idea that we have to occupy acreage, that we have to sort of occupy different countries. So, for example, Afghanistan is not the only place that terrorism could arise. It could arise again, and we could have to go back. But it could arise in Libya, the Sudan, Mali, Nigeria, Congo. There's dozens and dozens of places around the world. We need to be vigilant. We need to use our expertise and our intelligence gathering. And yes, we may have to strike at some point in time. In fact, there are many who argue had Clinton struck in '98 against Osama bin Laden when he was organizing, that we could have avoided the whole thing. So I'm not against striking against our enemies, but what I would say is occupying territory is antiquated. regime change doesn't work, nation building doesn't work, and we have to reevaluate how much money we're spending in Afghanistan.
How are we
trillions of dollars
How
there.
are we to assess what's happening in the West Wing? You have now 3 national security advisors who have come and gone. The president says we'll have a 4th in place next week. That was the message from yesterday. Here's a little bit of Steve Mnuchin and Mike Pompeo from the briefing room yesterday.
Is this national security team a mess?
Absolutely not. That's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard of.
Good thing that he's gone. This is a man who had very radical ideas about how the United States ought to act in the world, and basically it was to bomb everybody out of existence and then rebuild.
I think he had a different worldview from the president. I think John Bolton was more likely to be an advocate for using power, projecting force, and taking a more interventionist approach. I don't think he wanted to have a war everywhere in the world and, remake regimes.
Senator, I know you disagree strongly with a lot of that sentiment we just heard there, but how do you explain what's happening in the West Wing in the sense of transition that appears to be in constant motion?
I think the president's been very consistent all throughout. The Iraq war was a mistake, regime change is a mistake, and that we should try diplomacy, but we should also do it from a position of strength. This is a president who hasn't been afraid to act against ISIS. This is a president who hasn't been afraid to act when Syrians use chemical weapons. So I think the president has a combination of both strength, but also an idea that we could have peace and diplomacy through strength. And so I think the president is that consistent balancing force. I think there have been people around him who don't believe in his agenda. Frankly, I think John Bolton had his own agenda, and that was a problem. So my only advice to the president, and I don't really presume to tell the president what to do, is I want the president to select somebody who will further his agenda and will not try to undermine his agenda. And I don't think we've quite had that. We need a good fit with somebody who actually appreciates the president and will support the president.
Anyone in mind?
No, and I probably wouldn't publicly sort of call for anybody. If the president asks me, or if I talk to the president privately, I may mention some names. But I will say that he needs somebody. There are some people being floated around who are basically never Trumpers, who never supported Trump from the beginning and still have their own agenda. I think he needs to be very careful not to get them in place. The people who are always criticizing his foreign policy now, let's, for goodness sakes, don't put any of them in that position.
Okay, sir, in the moment we have left here, what are we to understand from the CIA report that was out yesterday?
I think that you're talking about the CIA report with regards to?
CNN reported that someone was extracted from Russia because of concerns about the president and security.
Yeah, I think CNN got the story wrong. That wouldn't be the first time. But I would say that I don't have enough inside information to tell you one way or another. I don't know who the person was, what their name was.
Mike Pompeo said it was inaccurate, and the CIA slammed the report as false.
Well, I think I think news outlets ought to be very careful about reporting about people who may still be behind enemy lines or wherever they are. And I think it's isn't the first time CNN may have jumped the gun on something and reported something. And all I can take is the government and Pompeo at his word that they're misreporting it. But I'd be very, very careful about outing people. Kind of reminds me of James Clapper, when James Clapper gave information out that ended up being used and publicly announced when we actually had an asset still in Yemen. So I think we need to be very, very careful with releasing classified information or talking about it. And I think basically the 5 people that talked to that reporter with CNN probably broke the law. Now, I know people news media go to the asset, but they broke the law about talking about this. Nobody should be talking about any kind of spy we might have had in Russia to a reporter for CNN. So we can't fault a news outlet for asking these sources, but we can certainly say, my goodness, who are the 5 people inside the Trump administration revealing secrets to CNN?
Well, Doug Collins called for an investigation of the network on this program yesterday. Are you suggesting there should be an investigation of some kind?
Well, see, I think it's a weird sort of thing. I don't think it's against the law for news outlets to ask sources. It is against the law if you work for the government to talk to the news media about classified information, and that sounds like what happened. And there's probably nothing more risky than talking about an asset that may or may not still be in transition from leaving a place. But particularly, we need to be very wary of these former intelligence heads that are now all over the media, many of them at CNN, who have previously revealed secrets. So I think we need to be very careful.
Senator, thank you for your time. Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky.
Thank you,
sir. The new book is called The Case Against Socialism. We will have you back.
Thank you, Senator.
It's out in 5 weeks, but we'll talk before then. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.